Peace and love, family. Before we get tonight's broadcast started, I wanted to make an announcement. All right. So on October the 23rd from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, join me on my channel for a virtual tribute to Nana Dr. Patricia Newton. All right. We're going to have I have a beautiful program laid out, in honor of Dr. Patricia Newton. I'm bringing on some wonderful speakers, people who knew her and knew her work. We're going to have Professor James Smalls, Anthony T. Browder, Baba Olatunji, Baba Imhotep, and Brother Jabari Nator. They will be joining me here. And guys, I'm telling you, we're going to roll out the red carpet. We're going to have libations, African drumming, African dancing. So you don't want to miss this. On October the 23rd from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join me right here on this channel for a virtual tribute to Nana, Dr. Patricia Newton. Okay. And as I stated before, we're going to have some heavy hitters, guys, on the platform. Thank you so much for joining. Let's get ready to roll. I'm excited about tonight's broadcast. I have with me tonight Dr. Rick Kittles, and I'm telling you, family, I've been a fan of his work for the past 7 years. And so tonight we're going to be dismantling a lot of the myths and lies that you hear regarding, African people. All right, let's get it started.
Let's combat and fight back with maltracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classes. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr.maat.msu.
Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Truth to Power Talk with your sister, Dr. Maat. Thank you for joining another powerful discussion. And tonight, I have with me another powerful guest, Dr. Rick Kittles. How are you tonight, Doctor?
I'm wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Doc, it's a pleasure to have you. It's my pleasure to have you on the platform. You're doing wonderful things with African ancestry. In fact, Doc, 7 years ago. 7 years ago, and I still have my envelope. Let me hide my address.
Okay.
This is the original envelope. And so 7 years ago, I purchased your mtDNA kit.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out, let me see if I found out. Oh, I'm sorry. 6 years ago. This is 2014.
Okay.
I found out that my mitochondrial DNA came from the Bamileke people of Cameroon.
All right.
So that it was a proud day for me, Dr. Kittles, when I found that out. But it was also a little somber, I guess you would say, because it's kind of like you hear about, your ancestors coming from Africa and getting caught up in the slave trade and being brought to the Caribbean and to America. And so you hear it, but to get the DNA, to get the findings and find out that this woman, because this was mtDNA, this woman, that someone in my bloodline, they endured the Middle Passage, and they came over here, and it was heartbreaking. So when I opened up my results, I cried. I was happy to find out, but I also cried, just knowing that, this did happen. This isn't something that's just in history books. This did happen. And so, again, I just want to give you your flowers while you can smell them and tell you you're doing wonderful things at African Ancestry. And there's a sister that also co-founded African Ancestry with you, right?
Right. Yeah. Gina Page.
Yep. Yes. Sister Gina Page. Yep. Sister Gina Page. And I had spoke to your assistant, Miss Taylor, and I was telling her that I would like to bring Miss Gina Page. Is she Dr. Gina Page or just Miss Gina Page? I want to.
Yeah, she's doctor. She's
okay.
Doctor.
Yeah, I want to bring Dr. Page. I want to bring her on the platform as well to have a conversation with her. All right. So, family. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something, Doc?
No, I was just saying thank you. Thanks for the kind words. I've been working hard trying to help bring African Americans closer to Africa.
And we appreciate you. We appreciate you. Family, share this show. I see that the views are going up. Family, this show should be packed. Okay, so head on over to Facebook right now, family. Share this show. And a matter of fact, I'm going to start a watch party. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a watch party, okay, on Facebook. I'm looking for it right now, but I'm going to start a watch party, family, during this discussion. If you beat me to it, family, just tag me in it. But share this show on Facebook. If you don't have a Facebook and you have Instagram or Twitter, post it on Instagram or Twitter. Dr. Kittles will be dismantling a lot of the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation that we hear regarding DNA and also African ancestry. But before we get started, family, I'm going to read his bio to you. All right, it's a short bio. All right, Dr. Rick Kittles is professor and founding director of the Division of Health Equities with the Department of Population Sciences at the City of Hope. He is also associate director of health equities of COH Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Kittles is well known for his research of prostate cancer and health disparities among African Americans. Dr. Kittles' research has focused on understanding the complex issues surrounding race, genetic ancestry, and health disparities. Dr. Kittles received a PhD in biological sciences from George Washington University in 1998. His first faculty appointment was at Howard University, Howard University, where he helped establish the National Human Genome Center at Howard University. In 2003, Dr. Kittles co-founded African Ancestry Incorporated, a private company that provides DNA testing services for tracing African genetic lineages to genealogists and the general public around the world. His work on tracing the genetic ancestry of African Americans has brought light to many issues, new and old, which relate to race, ancestry, identity, and group membership. Dr. Kittles' high-profile research and his strong ability to communicate genetic concepts and issues eloquently and understandably to the lay public has been featured over the past decade in 5 PBS and BBC network documentaries related to human biological diversity, race, and disease. His work has been featured on CNN in the CBS show 60 Minutes, where he was interviewed by Leslie Stahl. In 2010, Dr. Kittles was named in Ebony's magazine, the Ebony Power 100. Go ahead, Doc. Ebony selected the nation's top 100 African-American power players in sports, academia, religion, business, environment, science and tech, entertainment, arts, and letters, fashion, politics, media, activism, and health. In March of 2012, Dr. Kittles presented the keynote address to the United Nations General Assembly, International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Slavery in the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Ashe. Recently, Dr. Kittles was named by the Huffington Post as one of 50 iconic Black trailblazers who represent every state in America. Dr. Kittles has published over 200 research articles on prostate cancer genetics, race in genetics, and health disparities. Thank you so much, Dr. Rick Kittles, for joining us tonight, family. Again, share this show. Share this show tonight. I have with me Dr. Rick Kittles, and we will be talking about DNA. And I see that the numbers are going up, but some of you are saying, Dr. Maat, what's DNA? And some of you are saying, I already know what DNA is, right? So we know that DNA is the hereditary material that exists in every cell of our bodies. And in each cell, we have a set of 46 chromosomes, okay, 23 from each parent. All right. And then the 23rd chromosome, Dr. Kittles, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, from each parent determines the sex of the child. Right. So if we are given an XX, let's say that you get an X from your mother and a X from your father, your sex will be female. If you get an X from your mother, which is the only thing she can give you is an X, but if you get a Y from your father, then your sex will be male. Right. That's and right. So the Y chromosome is passed down from father to son. However, in all of the cells in our body, we have a structure, okay, called mitochondria. All right. And these are structures inside of our cells that convert energy food that our cells can utilize. And inside of our mitochondria, we have mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down from mother to all children. So, Doc, I just wanted to give them, you got some folks that might not know what it is, may not be familiar, with X chromosome, Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA. So I wanted to kind of comb through that really quickly. But Doc, first question to you. Now, for a while, I've been hearing this. With the X and Y chromosome, the X chromosome is substantially larger than the Y chromosome. Okay. And so there are people in the community, and I'm not calling names out or nothing like that, but it's myths and things that we've been hearing. So people will say, well, they call the Y a broken X, or they'll say because the X is much larger than the Y, then that signifies that females were here before males, or females are more intelligent than males, or more powerful than males, or more connected to the earth. I mean, so why is the X chromosome substantially larger than the Y? Than the Y chromosome.
Well, it's just really based on the structure of the chromosome. So all the 23 pairs are different sizes. Chromosome 1 is a very large chromosome. Chromosome 20 is very large. The X is larger than the Y. The Y DNA that makes up that chromosome is interesting because it's, when you look at it under like an electron microscope and compare it to the X, it's like 1,000 times smaller. It's just a glob of DNA. And the fascinating thing about it is, in terms of human evolution, the Y chromosome is getting smaller and smaller. So, ultimately some believe that the Y chromosome will just become non-existent anymore. It's just going to disappear. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that it is. I do know that it is getting smaller and smaller, based on the fact that it doesn't recombine like the other chromosomes. So if you have two X's, if you're a female, they will join together and mix their genes, and then they will, during that the period of the sperm and the egg coming together, they will, have a mixture there, and what we call recombination. But the Y chromosome doesn't do that. The Y chromosome has this uniqueness about it. There's a part of it that recombines with the X chromosome, but that's a very, very small part. The rest of it is what we call the non-recombining portion of the Y chromosome. And just based on time, over time, it just gets smaller and smaller.
So let me ask you a question, Dr. Kittles. When this happens, well, you said you don't think that the Y will ever be obsolete.
Right.
Okay. But if it were to occur, are you telling me that from here on out, the human species would be female? If that did occur?
I don't know how we could continue to produce offspring if there's no men.
Exactly.
So actually, if that happens, then that's the end of the human species altogether.
And so, okay, and that's interesting that you said that we can't procreate without males, because you do have people who believe that mammals are capable, or female humans at one point in time were capable of parthenogenesis. Is that true, Dr. Kittles?
No, I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about that. I haven't seen anything like that in the scientific literature.
Exactly.
Not for mammals. Not for mammals.
Exactly. And so we can't use the size of the X chromosome to determine who was here first, and who's smarter than who, and all of that stuff. Is that what you're saying, Dr. Kittles?
Right. So we would expect the emergence of both sexes around the same time, especially if we think about the generation of offspring and going on into the next generation and building on the human species generation after generation. They both should have been there at the same time, men and women.
And actually what you're saying to me, Dr. Kittles, is that our ancestors had it right. Because typically, when you read about, African, when you study African spiritual systems, they say that we were created in pairs.
Right.
And that, it wasn't one came before the other, and it wasn't this whole hierarchy. They said that we were created, in pairs.
Right.
And so, it's actually, you're saying that science is backing is backing this.
Right.
So obviously our ancestors had it right. Go ahead and elaborate, Doc.
No, I'm just saying that, if you think about how, when you think about sexual reproduction in humans, it's a very fascinating area. And so, we have these 2 pairs of chromosomes. And then as we create what we call gametes, right, which end up being sperm or egg, if you're a male, sperm, female, egg, during gametogenesis, those chromosomes divide. And so then you deliver them, if you're a man, through the sperm. And some of them may have an X on it, some may have a Y on it, depending on the sperm. But what's fascinating is once that sperm meets the egg, it's another reuniting of these chromosomes. And so the child is a mixture of the mother and the father because of those chemical bases that we call DNA that they inherit from their parents. 50% of their genome comes from their mother, the other 50% from their father. And so that's why we end up looking similar to both our parents. If you look at skin color and eye color, hair color, body height and body weight, children are always pretty much in between their mother and their father in terms of size, in terms of skin color, hair, and all of that, because we are a representation of both of them. And I just think that that's very fascinating when one looks at the opportunities for creating diversity in the human species based on sexual reproduction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Doc. Absolutely. And just when you were talking, I was thinking that, I've always said this, when people would base their identity on, solely on the mother or solely on the father, I'm saying, wait a minute, you inherited genetic material from both parents.
Right.
So, to say, well, I'm just this, and I'm basing this on my mother's genetic material, and then discounting the father is erroneous, and vice versa. So okay, but people do it.
Right.
People tend to do it.
I mean, even, if you think about it, the folks who do genealogy research, right? So they'll go and they'll research the historical record about one path of their family, and then they'll go down another path, and they'll build a family tree, right? And they'll have all this information about all the different characters in their family. And a lot of times what happens is they'll pick somebody out of that family to be the one that they connect with the most, right? Because I had a buddy who was, his great grandmother was a famous abolitionist. And he connected with that person. And I'm like, well, you had other people in the family that you can connect with.
Right.
Do that, right? And it's based on sort of our connections, how we shape our identity, what's important, what we value, And so I just think it's fascinating. I love to talk to Black folk about family history, because you really get to see sort of what they value in terms of their family lineage. Like most African Americans have some level of white ancestors in their family. You don't hear much talk about it.
No,
they'll claim Native American before they claim European. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. But
and so all of that is just very fascinating. It depends on how one places value on these different variables in your family. My mother had good hair. Well, it wasn't because it was Native American. It was because you had some white ancestor, and that's why the hair was straighter than, got that straightness in your family. So I think sometimes we have to celebrate and understand that we are a very complex, diverse community, and we get excited about a lot of different things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Doc, let's move to my next question. Is DNA a hoax? Because typically, Doc, and let me tell you where this comes from. As soon as and I've experienced this with folks, I say, well, we're sub-Saharan African people. A lot of us,
right,
who came over, most of us who came over here, we were, brought from the west and central parts of Africa. And they're like, what? No, no, something is wrong. We're not, so I understand the psychology of that and where that comes from. I get it. But I find it interesting, Dr. Kittles, that, DNA isn't a hoax when we use it to exonerate people from murder,
right,
for murder or rape, or when we use it for paternity tests, it's okay.
Right.
But when we use DNA to determine one's ancestry, now it's a hoax. So I'm just going to ask you flat out, and I already know the answer to my question. But Dr. Kittles, is DNA a hoax, sir?
No. So DNA testing is not a hoax. It's routine genetic technology. When I say routine, I mean you just mentioned it. People are doing it in forensics. They're doing it for paternity testing. So this is all the same technology, and it is at some level what we call empirical, meaning that it's solid science. And if for instance, you see a DNA profile at a crime scene, somebody put it there, okay? That means that profile was there, you found it, and the science proves it. Now, the science doesn't prove if you put it there or somebody else did, but that's a separate discussion. But no, DNA testing is not a hoax. What's funny, we did a study, a bunch of colleagues and myself, we call it the 4-city study. We went to Harlem, New York, Washington, D.C., Cincinnati, Ohio, and Oklahoma City. And we started the study in Oklahoma, where we these are all African Americans from these 4 cities. We looked at Ancestry and typed Ancestry, gave back the results to the individuals who were part of the study. And out of all the cities, the ones who felt that the science wasn't good or that this was a hoax were those who were in Oklahoma. And you know why? Because those in Oklahoma, those African Americans in Oklahoma, wanted proof that they were Native American. And so then when the genetics didn't prove or didn't support their folklore or their, how they were raised or whatever, or these ideas that they got about their family, when the DNA did not support that, of course, it became a hoax. This is a hoax. So the way I see it is this: if DNA provides some level of utility in your life, I'm sure you're going to say that you're going to value DNA testing. But if it goes counter to what you think you know, most of the time people come back with, "Oh man, that's nothing, man. That's fake. That's phony. It's a hoax." No, it's not a hoax. And it's all about how you use that technology.
Hold up, but Doc, you gotta say that for me again. I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. You said that if DNA adds value, repeat that statement. If it adds value
if DNA testing adds value to you, then you're gonna say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You see what I'm saying? So when there's strong utility with the technology, we like it. So for instance, DNA technology for paternity testing, there's strong utility. DNA technology for forensic and crime scenes and getting folks out of jail, there's strong utility. Folks like it. But when you go counter in terms of family history, when the DNA doesn't support what you've been told or how you were raised or what you thought, then all of a sudden DNA technology is a hoax.
Exactly, Doc. Exactly. But hold on, let me give it up to you. I don't know if you can hear my sound effect.
I got it.
That was fire, what you said. So if it's strong utility, then it's not a hoax. But but if it isn't,
right. I mean, so we had 4 cities of African Americans. The only city who didn't think that DNA had value was the ones in Oklahoma who wanted to use the technology to prove that they were Native American. And then once that support wasn't there, then they said it was a hoax. But everybody else said this was great. They really appreciated it. They valued the DNA technology. But those in Oklahoma didn't, because, as I said, they wanted to have some genetic support for their so-called family history.
Absolutely. And so, Doc, let me ask you another question, because you have some folks who will say, well, it's a hoax. I took 6 or 7 DNA tests from different companies and I got back different results. Can you explain that phenomenon? You got folks who say, yeah, explain that. They'll say,
it happens all the time. And I wish I could say to every African American who goes to all these different companies to slow down with that and not do that. But people go out and they spend their money. So the confidence that one has in these DNA tests is due to several things. how big your database is.
Come on.
How comprehensive your database is. And so in terms of this, the sequencing of the DNA and the algorithms, they're all the same. What's different, for the most part, they're all the same. What's different is the size of databases. So at one point, 23andMe had like 80 Black Africans, West Africans, 80 of them. And then they're going to tell you something about Africa. You see what I'm saying?
Come on, Doc. Come on.
We had over 80,000 lineages in our database of African, our comprehensive database of African lineages. So it's a very different, and you can't compare. And so people would they'd get our test, and then they'd go to 23andMe, then they'd go to Ancestry, and then family tree DNA, and they'll have 4 different results. And then come out and say, how come how come they gave us a different result than you? I would always say, I don't know why. You should ask them.
Come on.
And then ask them also, when you ask them how big their database is for Africa. Ask them what African populations do they have? Because we know, based on the history of the transatlantic slave trade, a lot of the groups that were involved, that were kidnapped, where enslaved Africans originated from. We don't know all the history, but we do know enough to say these are representative samples of populations that where individuals were kidnapped and brought over to the so-called New World. So no, we have a very extensive database, and we do not get caught up in all this different companies having different results. If you're of African descent, African Ancestry is the place to go.
Come on, Doc. Exactly. And someone in the chat room asked, what is his company, family? Go to AfricanAncestry.com. Is that correct, Dr. Kittles?
That's right. African Ancestry.
You got to go there, family. That's
one word, AfricanAncestry.com.
AfricanAncestry.com, family. Right. If you need to take a DNA test, you want to trace your mtDNA, your mitochondrial DNA, you want to trace your Y chromosome, you head to AfricanAncestry.com. And I'm not just telling you this just to tell you this. I'm telling you this because I did it myself. Okay. I'm not selling you something, that I haven't done myself. And I have my certificate here, family. Mm-hmm. And I also have, and I love how you broke this down, Dr. Kittles. You also gave me my mtDNA sequence. I'm gonna put my hand over it. So he also provides you with your mtDNA sequence. All right. And so he gives you all of this information, family. So Doc, let me ask you this. Another reason why folks will say that it's a hoax, online, there are a few articles that said that nobody can tell you the percentage of your DNA, that, it's a hoax to say you're 94% sub-Saharan African, or you're, you have 2% Native American blood in you, or you have 1%. So people are saying that is no way to gauge that when you're analyzing DNA. Is that true or false, Dr.
No, there is a way. Those estimates have a standard error to them. So they're not, that 2%, or let's say that 10%, 10% Native American, let's say. There's a standard error, plus or minus, 2%, let's say. So it's somewhere between 8 and 12%. Okay. And these estimates are pretty robust. All right. So we're far away from not being able to do it. We're at a point now where it's getting better and better every year because we get more markers. We're sampling more what we call parental populations. Those populations that come, from West Africa, let's say, or Europe or Asia, and even Native American community. So we're sampling more and more, every year, and those estimates are getting tighter and tighter. So no, I mean, I'll tell you one thing. When you have a family tree, right? Let's just say you have a family tree, and you have your 4 grandparents up there. One of those grandparents is white, and everybody else is Black, right? Those other 3 grandparents are Black. You would say that you're 25% European. But when we look at the DNA of those individuals, it's right on, it's spot on, 25% European, based on the family history, based on the family tree. And so that's the cool part, is that, when we supplement or compare the genetic information with the genealogy information, it's pretty much spot on. Now, unless somebody is adopted or something like that, or false paternity, that's a different story. But for the most part, it's spot on.
Beautiful. Dr. Kittles, so I want to move into my next question. What were your findings when you analyzed the DNA of African-American females and African-American males? But I want you to begin with females first. But hold on, Doc. Family, I see the numbers are going up. Share this show. I just made my post public on Facebook, so I know some of you were trying to share it, and initially it was friends only, but I just made it public. So if you're watching on Facebook, please share this show, okay? And if you're watching on YouTube, share this show. And also if you're watching on Facebook, head on over to YouTube, type in Dr. Maat, subscribe to my channel so that as soon as I go live, you will be notified. So again, Doc, what were your findings when you analyzed the DNA of African American females and then African American males?
So when we first started looking at Black women, African American women, we were looking mainly at the mitochondrial DNA. And mitochondrial DNA is maternally inherited. So, you get it from your mother, her from her mother, her from my mother, all the way back, generation after generation. And so what we found is for many of those mitochondrial DNAs, for African American mitochondrial DNAs, these maternally inherited lines, 95% of them went back to Africa, to West Africa. So
hold on. Say that again, Doc. Say that again.
So about 95% of the mitochondrial DNA in African Americans goes back to Africa.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on. All right, Doc. Go ahead and continue.
So this is the interesting thing, though. So then when we look at the Black men, right? So these are African American men. We looked at their Y chromosome. We didn't see that same 95%, that very strong signature of West Africa. In fact, among the men with their Y chromosomes, what we found was upwards of 40% of them going to Europe and not to Africa. So they were only 60% of the Y chromosomes in Black men going back to West Africa. Now, some of you are like, wow, that's crazy. But that is the signature of the behavior. That's like the residual genetic signature of the behavior of white men on enslaved African women early in the history, and then the continuation of that after slavery. So white Y chromosome, European Y chromosomes, every generation are coming into the African American population. And it started, during slavery, the period of slavery, and we see it. We call it sex bias gene flow, meaning that the direction of genes from Europeans is coming from men more so than women. Okay, so we're getting, in terms of European genes, the contribution coming more so from European men into our population than European women. Now, I'm not saying that there's no European women coming in, because you just think about it. I mean, especially lately, there's been a lot of brothers with white women, but that's a separate story. The mitochondrial DNA, we don't see that signature like we see with the Y chromosome.
Okay.
So you look a little confused.
No. I was reading some of the comments. That's all, Doc. But no, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%, Doc.
Yeah, and so actually, that means that 4 out of every 10 Black male that we test has a European Y chromosome. And in fact, I have a European. I'm one of them that have a European. I was crushed when I first did it. I remember I was working at Howard University, and we was working on some of these markers, and I had ran this gel and the DNA on the gel, and next to it was an African. We had a sample from Nigeria, and it was my sample next to it, and my sample didn't migrate with the African, and I was like, with the Nigerian, and I was like, gosh, what the heck? And then I realized what my father told me when I was younger, that my great grandfather was white, and that the history, because I was born in Georgia, my family's from Georgia, so the history in the antebellum South was one in which obviously there was a lot of mixing, mainly through from white men.
Mm-hmm. And so then you had the science to back up what your father shared with you.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So here, I could have had that cognitive dissonance, right? And say, oh, this is garbage. Gotten mad, right? Gotten mad because I had a European Y chromosome instead of an African. But then I started thinking, I was like, my father told me this when I was younger, that we had a European ancestor in the family. And then come to find out that we see that regularly in the African-American population.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Kittles. So someone's in the chat, brother Amponza, he says, so basically, if you get a DNA or genetic test, it's best to follow the matrilineal or mother's line.
Right. That's what most people do. Most people do that because it's almost guaranteed it'll come back West Africa. I mean, African, for the most part, West African.
Yeah, but what you want to know, you was going, especially if you're a male, you will want to know.
Yeah, you want to know both sides, and that's what I did. But what I ended up doing though was I ended up testing my father's maternal line because men have both Y and the mitochondrial DNA. We just can't pass the mitochondrial DNA on. So he got his mitochondrial DNA from his mother, right, and then his Y chromosome from his father.
Absolutely.
So you can test other people in the family to get other lineages.
Absolutely. So Doc, let me ask you my next question. So a lot of us, so when you analyze this, so you told us that if you look at the maternal, if you look at the mtDNA, you said 99% of the time? 95% of the time it goes back to Africa. And when you look at the Y chromosome, about 60% of the time, it goes back to Africa. Mm-hmm. All right. But I want to ask you something else. What about the Native American blood? Typically in Black families, you hear, my grandfather was Blackfoot or Cherokee. I got Native American blood in my family. When you analyzed or examined the DNA of African American people, did you find a substantial amount of Native American ancestry in our DNA?
Not really. No, not as much as people say. I mean, folks love to say my mama got good hair and I got this Native American. We don't see it that much. I mean, in fact, it's in the African American population in different communities. Like for instance, in that 4-city study we did, I think the highest percent Native American was in New York and Harlem, and a lot of that was driven by Dominicans. Okay. And so, we don't see that much, and the highest, I think at that point was like 10%, 11%. Normally it's 6% or less, across the board. So yeah, I don't know, but I know why. I mean, we would, as a community, we would claim Native American before European because of the experience that we've had, as the experiences here in America. And so, that is one of the reasons why we end up saying that, and we perpetuate this over and over. And people got these pictures. Oh, look at my auntie, look at my grandmother, look at her high cheekbones. High cheekbones are in West Africa too. The Igbo people in Nigeria have.
Come on, teach, Doc, teach.
And hair, straight hair. The Fulani, the Kanuri people. I mean, it's like there are African groups that have features that are. That one may consider to be Native American. So I think we have to just be honest and understand that while we might have been raised in that manner about Native Americans in our family, when the genetics doesn't necessarily prove it, we have to go and try and reconcile that data instead of getting upset.
Absolutely, Doc. And the reason why I asked is because I had went to 23andMe, found out that I'm 94% sub-Saharan African. Mm-hmm. I was ecstatic, by the way, when I found that out. But this is after, of course, I went to African Ancestry back in 2014. So I went here first. I went to you first, and then I went to 23andMe because I've been hearing about all of these percentages, and I was just curious about it. And so I did take the test. I found out that I'm 94% sub-Saharan African, and I only had 0.1% Native American blood in me. So I went to my father. I said, "Pops, you told me that I had a grandparent that was, Cherokee or Blackfoot or one, from one of the Native American tribes. And that's not true. And he said, well, I thought that's what, my father told me. And so, like you said, Dr. Kittles, we're finding out, and I'm telling you, give thanks for science. We're finding out, whether the stuff that's been told to us, we can validate that now,
right.
With DNA, right. we can validate it. So I love it. I love it. So Doc, another question for you. Were the Aborigines in America, the Native Americans, were they African people? Because I've been battling with folks, Dr. Kittles, online. They're like, the Aborigines were African. The Olmecs were African. The Mayans were African. The Aztecs were African. The mound builders were African. It was Africans or the Aborigines, So, Doc, and I see you smiling. You're chuckling over it. So, yeah. Doc, look. So that's what I've been hearing. And so, Doc, please tell me where, with your findings, when you analyze the DNA of the Native American people, right. Here, are they sub-Saharan African people?
No, they're not. They're of Asian ancestry.
Hold on, Doc.
The Aborigines, the Native Americans are of Asian ancestry.
Hold on, Doc. Just hold on. And they'll tell you that, Doc. Like, I've spoken to Native Americans. They'll tell you that their ancestors came from East Asia.
Right.
They tell you that. So people are like, no, the original people, the Olmecs were African. Look at the lips. Look at the statues. Look at
if you're a student of science, right? Anthropology and genetics and all of that, all the evidence supports this migration out of East Asia across the Bering Straits into North America and then into Central and South America. And all of that stuff, there's artifacts, there's history, there's linguistics, language, and there's DNA, all of which show this migration or movement of people out of Asia into the New World. But I think what happened is, we had a couple of scholars who, these are great African-American scholars who wrote some really good pieces. And for the most part, they should be viewed as hypotheses, not fact, right? And so they came before Columbus. This whole issue of the Olmecs and the Aztec being of African ancestry. I mean, those are interesting stories, but there's no proof to that. And also, to be honest with you, it's very disrespectful. It's very disrespectful to the Native American brothers and sisters for us to claim that they are of African ancestry. They know their history. And that's like somebody saying to us and trying to reshape or reinvent our history. We would get upset.
Absolutely.
So I don't play that with some of these cats, because they, I hear this debate all the time, and it's very disrespectful to Native Americans when you start talking about they are, them and their family history and all of that they are of African descent. Humanity, everybody's from Africa. It's all relative in terms of when we left, but in terms of how Native Americans got to the New World, they came from Asia.
Doc, I gotta hit it up again. Hold on. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Kittles, that it is disrespectful.
It is. It's disrespectful to Native Americans and the Black folk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, absolutely. So, you got folks, I'm telling you, it's a huge movement online, Doc, the Aboriginal movement, where you got folks, running around here claiming to be Native Americans and claiming to be the Aborigines. And I agree with you. It is disrespectful to the Native Americans and also to our sub-Saharan African ancestors. Right. It absolutely is.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree with you more, Doc. So Doc, what were your findings when you analyzed the DNA of other people? So, for example, when you looked at the DNA of Europeans, Asians, You already explained, Native Americans. You already said, yeah, so you already explained that. But Europeans, Asians, the brothers and sisters who refer to themselves as, Latina or Latino or Afro-Latina. So what were your findings when you analyzed those groups or the DNA from those populations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when we look at different genetic systems like the mitochondrial DNA or the Y chromosome or some of these ancestry markers that give you percentage ancestry, there's a story that they tell, and the story represents the individual's relationship with the family, right? So it's like a hierarchy. You as an individual and your family is represented in the community is in a region, the region is a geographic region. And so we can go back like a hierarchy and explore the ancestry looking at different markers. And one of the things we see is that there is this what we call a continuum of genetic variation, meaning that there's these clusters of groups that are related geographically, and they share a certain genetic background, and they differ from somebody on the other side of the world because they've been isolated. Groups that have been close together physically, they end up mixing, and then they end up getting homogeneous in the sense. There's not going to be variation with your neighbors, with your next door neighbor, as it would be with the guy on the other side of town or in another state. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that's the thing about genes, and I tell my students all the time, genes don't stay in your genes. Anytime you bring two groups of people together, there's going to be some mixing. That's why, 40% of Black men have these European Y chromosomes, because there's mixing that's happening. And there's mixing that happens around the world based on how close communities are together. They're going to be more prone to interact, to trade, to educate, and have sex. Okay, and then their genomes are going to be mixed and represent that mixture within that geographic community. It wasn't until after Columbus, so-called Columbus, right, 1491, 1492, where the whole world became opened up. And it didn't happen overnight, but that was when it really started opening up. Because before then, West Africa wasn't really penetrated by Europeans, and Native Americans were still living healthy, prosperous lives, right? Once this whole movement of colonialism and migration occurred, we then see that there are some differences that happened before that movement started. And since the movement started, there's mixing that's occurring. So for instance, in the United States, there really isn't a pure European, everybody's what we call interbred, and you can look at it, your friends from school or your coworkers, there's a lot of mixture in all of these different communities, European, Asian, Native American, Latino, and African-American communities. The Latinos are interesting because, they're just as diverse as African-Americans, if not more. They have Spanish European ancestry, Native American genetic ancestry, and then in some cases, West African, depending on where, if it's the islands of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, some parts of Colombia, Chile, that have been contributing to the transatlantic slave trade. So they have a history, and so we see it reflected in their genomes. And that's why I said Hispanics are just as diverse, if not more, than African Americans, because they have three major proportions. Many Latino communities have a high proportion of Native American ancestry, especially like in Mexico and in Central America.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting here thinking about that history when the Spaniards came over and and conquered and colonized, like you said, down in the Mesoamerica and in South America. So like you said, the DNA is telling us this story,
right?
It's validating the history, Dr. Kittles. So absolutely. I'm sorry. Did you want to expound further on the question, Doc, or?
No. I was just saying that diversity that we see based on ancestral proportions. Like for instance, you said, this is perfect. You said you was 94% West African.
Yes.
Right. And I have some buddies. I'm 90%. Okay. 90. I have some buddies who are like 68, right? And if they walked in the room and said they were Black, you walk in the room, say you're Black, nobody's going to challenge you. You know what I'm saying? We all Black, right?
Right.
We go from Halle Berry to Wesley Snipes and everybody in between. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I mean, we are extremely diverse genetically, vastly different genetic backgrounds. And what I love and appreciate about Black folk is that appreciation of that diversity and the fact that we need to acknowledge that diversity and use it as a strength instead of a weakness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And Doc, this is my final question. I know I have about 10 minutes with you, so I'm going to ask you this question. And then I know a few people posted questions in the chat. And so I definitely want to, open it up for questions. Okay. So family, if you do have some questions, I have took notice of it. I do see it, but I'll make sure that I ask Dr. Kittles. Okay. But we can't keep them on here all night. All right. So Dr. Kittles, what do you believe should happen or will happen as more and more diasporan Africans determine our ancestral homelands? What do you think should happen or will happen?
That's a great question. So I still believe, so what started me in this whole process, what got me involved and so eager to do this, provide this service to the Black community, was I wanted us to be closer to West Africans. I wanted us to understand and connect stronger than we were connected. I remember, back when I was working on a lot of this, Liberia and areas around there, the Grain Coast, there was a lot of civil war, there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of kids getting macheted, and there was a very a low appreciation of that at the national level for African Americans. We did not really acknowledge that. We didn't go out and lobby against, that sort of activity in our homeland. For some of us, it's our homeland. And so I wanted us to get closer and closer. So that's what started this whole process. I wanted us to understand, learn, appreciate, and ultimately take action with that appreciation and education, to lobby, to go out and say, I want dual citizenship,
Come on, talk about it.
Washington did, right? Where you say, look, I have genetic ancestry. I have some family history connecting myself to Sierra Leone or to Cameroon or to Nigeria. And so once you start talking like that, that's powerful. That's a power move. That is a move in which, you are no longer isolated on the south side of Chicago, or the west side of New York, or South Central LA. You're moving beyond that environment. You know what I'm saying? You're becoming international. And we have this strong affiliation and connections and family history with these individuals. And there's a lack of there, historically there was a lack of concern about it, or a lack of even wanting to acknowledge it. And so that's all I wanted to do. And I'm excited that it's happening, and I'm looking forward to seeing it happen even more. Beautiful,
beautiful. I mean, Dr. Kittles, brother, I give thanks for you. And I mean, I'm just sitting over here. I don't want to get emotional on the broadcast, but I mean, what you're doing is powerful, because of the, some of us call it the kidnap trade, or the African Holocaust, or the, the transatlantic slave trade, or better yet, Dr. Marima Annie Nana calls it the Ma'afa. So because of the Ma'afa, Dr. Kittles, we were disconnected. Typically when we talk about the era of enslavement and colonization, we do talk about families being ripped apart. We do talk about the abuses, the rapes, and all of that, being castrated, the hangings, the lynchings. But we rarely, Doc, talk about that disconnection, between us and the motherland, us and the continent. And so your work is allowing us it's reestablishing that lost connection. When I was in Ghana last year, and I went to Cape Coast. I went to Cape. They call it the Cape Coast Castle, and also the Elmina Castle. And I looked at the door no return at Cape Coast, and also in Elmina. And I was just sitting there looking at it and thinking to myself how, our ancestors, once they walked through those doors, once they went through those doors and were packed on ships like sardine, packed like cattle on those ships, how they never saw their families again. They never saw the continent again. And then I'm thinking about their, the family on the other side who never saw their loved ones again. And so now your your work is allowing us to go home, and to reestablish that connection, Doc. And so for that, I give thanks. And so, and I also give thanks for your time, coming on the platform. You are a very, very busy man, I know. And so, I was going back and forth with Miss Taylor. What's the schedule like? What's going on? And you made it. And so, Doc, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate the invitation to come and join you, Dr. Maat, and I will. I'd love to come back again one day.
Absolutely. So, Doc, I just want to take about 5 minutes. I know we're down about 4.5 minutes left, but I do want to take some time to ask you some questions from the chat.
Okay.
A lot of brothers and sisters posted questions, and so let me get to it. Okay, so Sister Judy Jones, my Bamaliki sister, she said, question for Dr. Kittles, is there a close DNA relationship between the people of Nigeria and Cameroon?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. We have to understand that the current boundaries, these country borders that we see really just came about, after one of the world wars. And it was carved up by Europeans. And so before and after that, there was a lot of movement across these arbitrary lines. And in fact, some of those lines actually split up groups. So there were families that were on those borders who ended up splitting up, one being affiliated with Nigeria, the other one being affiliated with Cameroon. And so, there is strong genetic similarities with, in particular, East Nigerians from the eastern part of the country and Cameroonians from the west part of their country. It's, Calabar is there, Igbo folk are there. There are some very interesting connections genetically with those groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doc, when I looked at, they said I was 94% sub-Saharan African, but it says 79% of that came from Nigeria. So, that was a really good question. Brother Jay asked, what is the DNA of the Moors?
The DNA of the Moors. Okay, so it depends on what affiliation of the Moors. Are you talking about the European or are those from Northern Africa? So let's talk about the Northern African Moors. I haven't seen any genetic data, right? But I would suppose, based on the history, that they represent what we see in Northern Africa, which is, Berber type, Tuareg type in Mali, that sort of affiliation. Now, there were some families, big Moorish families, that actually came up from the Senegambia region. But for the most part, the Moors, I would expect them to be similar to what we see in North Africa.
Okay, and that's what when you said North Africa, the first thing I thought about were the Berbers when you said it. All right, so KC, and I don't know whether this is sister or brother, but it says KC says, can we find out if we have connections to other parts of the African diaspora like Brazil, Puerto Rico, Bahamas, etc.?
That's a great question. I think ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to become more and more, we're going to operationalize these results more and more. And so there are people now who've set up these websites and these dashboards online where they're sharing their information, looking for these connections, right? And so I think that would be a very fascinating sort of project to compare these genetic lineages across the African diaspora and see. It wouldn't be surprising if we find a large portion of Yoruba lineages in Brazil because of the religion that is still evident there today, that is of Yoruba descent. And so, I would expect to see pockets throughout the diaspora of these clusters, and it'd be fascinating to do it. And I think you can do it simply, just by posting online.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Brother Wujaru Ma'at asks, does the social construct of race have a biological reality?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, it does. So I'm not saying that race is biological, but I'm saying the consequences of race can be biological. Meaning, race is a social cultural construct that's mediated through issues of skin color and ancestry. And so skin color in the United States is used to stratify these groups, Black, white, Hispanic, and even among African Americans, to stratify African Americans based on skin color. Now, when you have these racially stratified groups and then you start placing value or opportunities in one versus the other, or restrict access to one versus the other, what is then created is a physiological response to stress, discrimination, and racism. So, to go back to your statement, does the sociological construct of race have a biological, biological underpinning or something like that, he said? Yes, it does, because of that process of stress and discrimination, how that creates a physiological response. And so people that are of darker complexion with higher African ancestry are more prone to be hypertensive, diabetic, low income and education, because of how skin color has been used to stratify groups in the United States. So yes, it does have, while it's not a biological, race is not biological, it does have biological consequences.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kittles. And two more questions, guys, because I know we could be doing this all night. Brother Kwame Apaya asks, he says, please ask, what's done with the DNA after the results? Many of us don't trust these companies because some sell our DNA are in cooperation with the government.
Right. That's the best question tonight. So with African Ancestry, one of the reasons why African Ancestry didn't do a lot of things that other companies are doing is because me and Gina, share the same sensitivities of the Black community. We know that we can be exploited at any time. We know that if we share too much of this information, it could be used against us. And so when we set up the company, we set up a contract. It's called terms and conditions. Everybody signs it when you get the test. And it says that African Ancestry, when we get your swab, the only thing we're going to do is exactly what we say we're going to do. We're going to sequence it and tell you your ancestry. Then we throw it away. Listen to what I just said.
Say it again, Doc.
Throw that fire out there.
Yeah, go ahead, Doc. Go. Let me
we
get it.
Let throw the DNA sample in the garbage. We do not share any genetic information with any third parties, businesses. You know how much, like, American Express wanted so much of our data at one point. I mean, we could be like billionaires. Okay, but we were like, no, we're not sharing any of this because we set up a contract with the community. So we don't share any of that information, personal, financial, nor the biological information. We don't share.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on. I got to give it up for you for that, Doc. Goodness gracious.
I think some people, if you're okay with the time, I can go on.
That's fine. Keep going, Doc. I'm listening to you.
Some people believe that all companies have the same business model, and that is the furthest from the truth. The business model for 23andMe, very similar to the business model of Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com, you just don't know the model yet because they haven't told you. But at least 23andMe told you straight up that if you get in their database, they're selling that information. They're selling your health-related data, and they're selling your DNA. They have sold to pharma, big pharma, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of access to their database, hundreds of millions of dollars to several of these companies. That's their business model. Their business model was not, oh, we're going to help black folk, or we're going to help, white folk find their ancestry. Their business model was collect as much information as we can on anybody and then sell it. So everybody that is on their rolls, that have been in their database, unless you tell them not to share it, it's already sold. Ancestry.com is the same thing. They just haven't said it out loud. All of a sudden now they're talking about, we're going to develop a test for breast cancer risk. You was doing that from the very beginning. Right. It wasn't the business model. Why do you think they can sell these tests for so cheap? Because it's not about making money off those tests. They're making money off the data that they generate from those tests. And I see a question there about Dr. Shamarka Keita. He is a mentor of mine. I mad respect for him. He's a physical anthropologist. Lives in Washington, D.C. He's a physician and a physical anthropologist. I just saw that question.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And another question, Dr. Kittles. Brother Chief X asked. He said, "What is your opinion on the ancient Egyptians?" Remember, it was this whole thing of whether or not the ancient Egyptians were sub-Saharan African. There were Europeans who tried to say that they were, European or Arabs. And typically when you look at ancient Egyptians, we look at the paintings of them, they look either Arabic today or they look, like Europeans. Mm-hmm. So were the ancient Egyptians people who, I guess, derived from sub-Saharan Africa? Because our scholars tell us that the ancient Egyptians, that Nubia is the mother and ancient Egypt is the daughter. Mm-hmm. And so that the ancient Egyptians were derived from from Africans that came from the interior of Africa. So what are your thoughts, Doc?
Right. So another fascinating question. You got to think about it. Egypt had many dynasties. That civilization spanned, I should say, a large amount of time. And depending on the time period, there was either a large influx of people who were melanated versus those who weren't at different times. We know that Nubia had a significant contribution to not only the Sudan, but also Egypt, right? So it wouldn't be surprising that during certain periods, certain dynasties, they would probably be mainly full of Black people in terms of leadership and the community. But then things change through time. And so I wouldn't say that Egyptians were always Black, but I think that there were certain time periods where there was a large number of people, of Nubians, with melanated folk who controlled that region and contributed to the civilization. But like Greece, it was conquered by so many. It was fighting back and forth, influx of these. So from the south and from the north and from the east, and so it's not surprising that Egypt looks the way it looks now.
Absolutely. Well, Doc, let me ask you this though. When the first dynasty was established, you had King Narmer. I'm saying, though, in the first dynasty, were those sub-Saharan Africans? I'm saying before, they were invaded from the north and before the Arabs and everyone came in, those Africans, who established the first dynasty. So I'm talking about King Narmer and then his successors, I guess. Mm-hmm. But were they sub-Saharan African, Doc?
I don't know. I can't be definitive on that. I mean, I would expect, based on what we know about the history, that they were Black African.
Yeah, because
I wouldn't posit a position on it.
Okay, I understand. I know that Jope, some people say Diop, but Sheikh Anta-Diop, he said that they were, and him and Theophilo Banga, they went to the conference, the Cairo Symposium, I believe they said in 1975, and he said they measured the melanin concentration.
Right. Yeah. So actually, I translated the melanin content paper. It was in French that he did with another scientist, looking at the melanin content of some of the mummies. But for me though, that was at that time, I don't know if it was an accurate dating of that mummy, of the actual individual.
Dating or measuring the melanin content.
Well, at that point, it was just a chemical reaction, and it appeared that it had high melanin content. So it was pretty simple. The chemistry was pretty simple. I'm talking about the actual period in which that mummy was there.
Was there. Okay. Yeah. So you said the dating might not have been as accurate.
Right.
Okay. Right. And you know what, Doc, when we talk about, the work of our predecessors, I tell people all the time that, it's okay to critique. It's okay to examine, and if they are wrong, it's okay to correct. You have a lot of people that when you tend to correct, our predecessors, our elders, oh, you're trying to correct this person. Well, what have you done? Well, and they get kind of, they jump on the defense. Right. But we have to understand that as time goes on, information changes. And so the information that we have available today, they didn't have that at their disposal, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so it's nothing wrong with updating, that information, or the work of our predecessors. There's nothing wrong.
I mentioned earlier about, they came before Columbus, when you really read it now, currently, there's some big gaps there. But I'll tell you right now, if it wasn't for Van Sertima and others, I wouldn't be here.
Come on.
That's right. Reading his stuff and Sheikh Annie Jope's work, it was just, for me, it was like, yo, I can do this.
That's right.
I need to learn as much science as possible. It was inspiring. Okay. So don't think that their work was in naught, because what it did was it inspired a generation of people, and it's still inspiring people. But we have to be honest about, the limitations of it.
Okay, beautiful. And Doc, I agree with that. And whenever I had this discussion, I always think of Benjamin Franklin. Ben Franklin, they say that he's the father of electricity, right? But Benjamin Franklin thought that, that electricity was due to the flow of protons. But then they later found out that it's due to the flow of electrons. Right. But they still regarded him as the father of electricity. No one said, throw his work away. He got something wrong. He's still venerated and still called the father of electricity. And we should do the same thing with our ancestors. They didn't get it all right. They didn't get it all right. So anyway, Doc, thank you so much for coming on the platform. Doc, do you have, hold on, I got to give it up for Dr. Rick Kittles. Hold on. Telling you, Doc, thank you so much for coming on the platform. Doc, do you have any closing words for the listening audience?
No, the only thing I would say is, stay woke, y'all, and I know that many of the folk who listen to some of my talks, they're really into science. They're really into math and science. So I'm just gonna, especially for the younger folk, just keep pushing in that area, man. We need you. Things are rapidly changing as it relates to science and technology. So I'm looking forward to, looking back and seeing a lot of young folk who look like me.
That's right.
Engaged in this stuff. And guess what? I could be saying or doing some things that I think scientifically are right, but some brother or sister 10 years from now may prove me wrong. But that's how science is, right? You move on. So
you update. You update things. Like you said, things are always changing. We have new technology, and with the new technology, we can retrieve, new data. Right. And so, and I know a lot of you in the chat are followers of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey said we need to raise up a generation of scientists.
That's right.
That's what he called us to do.
That's right.
All right. So thank you so much again, Doc, for coming on the platform. But Doc, before you run, I want you to sit tight, okay? After the outro. All right. Okay. So family, join me back here I'll be going live on Friday and Saturday of this week. I got a special guest coming on. All my guests are special, but I got someone coming on Friday and Saturday. All right, so join me back here, family, on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and also on Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Peace, love, and light.
Let's combat and fight back with no threats. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classes. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maat.